Everyone hates going to work at least sometimes, even if you're a millionaire movie star with thousands of adoring fans.
Once again, my life has been saved by the miracle of lasagna.
The story of how comedy legend Bill Murray ended up voicing a lasagna-loving cat in a horrible half-animated, half-live-action movie almost sounds like the plot to a comedy film itself. Apparently, he'd been wanting to do a cartoon movie, and when a script came his way that appeared to have been written by the legendary Joel Coen of the Coen brothers, he didn't look beyond the first few pages before signing up. As Murray tells the story, it wasn't until filming was about to begin that he learned the writer was not Joel Coen of The Big Lebowski and No Country for Old Men fame, but actually Joel Coen, best known for writing films like Monster Mash the movie and Cheaper by the Dozen. At that point, it was too late to back out, and Murray claims he spent weeks in the sound booth working on the dialogue in a futile attempt to save both Garfield and its sequel, A Tale of Two Kitties. It's definitely a cautionary tale, but now he wishes the Coen brothers would really make a Garfield movie. Multiple movie contracts have been a staple of Hollywood since the studio system days of the 30s and 40s, and they're still quite common today, even though actors should probably know better by now. In one recent example, Shia LaBeouf was roped into a 3-movie deal for the Transformers franchise. Following the second movie in the series, Revenge of the Fallen, LaBeouf wasn't shy about his disdain for the sequel. In an interview with reporters at Cannes in 2010, he singled out director Michael Bay and said, "I wasn't impressed with what we did. There were some really wild stunts in it, but the heart was gone. We got lost. Mike went so big that it became too big. Unless you have those relationships, then the movie doesn't matter. Then it's just a bunch of robots fighting each other."
Please, just let me live, just let me, just stop screaming! Can't take that guy anymore.
Despite the heavy derision from critics, all of the Transformers films have been box office successes, particularly internationally. LaBeouf would finally manage to exit the franchise after the third film, Dark of the Moon, and though he may have hated the creative experience of working on them, surely the millions of dollars he made as Sam Witwicky offers some consolation. Today, he might be one of the most respected British actors working, appearing as the iconic Jean-Luc Picard in the Star Trek franchise and Professor X in the X-Men movies. But in the early 1980s, he was practically unknown in Hollywood. Though he had a role in David Lynch's Dune in '84, most of his work was still on the stage in those days, and that unfortunately left him with very little in his pocket. In fact, he was so hard up for cash that in 1985 he was forced into a role in the ill-advised action sequel Wild Geese 2 because he was in dire need of some home repairs. According to Stewart, a local contractor priced out the desperately needed work on his windows at £2,000 sterling, nearly $10,000 in today's money. Stewart told a crowd at Wizard Comic-Con in 2010, "The next day I get a call from my agent saying, 'You're not gonna want to do this, but you have an offer to play a Russian colonel in Wild Geese 2. When his agent told him that it paid £2,000, Stewart had no choice but to accept. Realizing that the fans in attendance might now go looking for the movie to mock him, Stewart made sure to preface their enjoyment by telling them, "Just remember, it paid to replace my bay window." Still one of the biggest leading men in Hollywood, Brad Pitt came to fame in the early 90s. After the turn of the millennium, though, Pitt had a few clunkers mixed in with his critically acclaimed hits, like 2004's Troy. It's a movie he's not particularly fond of these days, nor anything he's proud of. He said in an interview with the New York Times in 2019, "I could not get out of the middle of the frame. It was driving me crazy. I become spoiled working with David Fincher."
He's the biggest man I've ever seen. I wouldn't want to fight him.
That's why no one will remember your name.
But what might be most surprising is that it's not a movie he even wanted to make. He revealed, "I pulled out of another movie and then had to do something for the studio, so I was put into Troy. It wasn't painful, but I realized that the way that movie was being told was not how I wanted it to be. I made my own mistakes in it." He nevertheless praised director Wolfgang Peterson, but he said he sees Troy as a learning experience that taught him to be intentional about the stories and films he chooses to do.
I'm flesh and blood, but not human. I haven't been human for 200 years.
Even a decade before Troy, Brad Pitt made a movie he's not too proud of. It was the early 1990s, and he was tapped to star as Louis in the Neil Jordan adaptation of Anne Rice's gothic romance novel, Interview with the Vampire, opposite Tom Cruise. At first excited to star in the film, Pitt said he quickly changed his mind after struggling with excessive makeup, uncomfortable contact lenses, and a difficult nighttime shoot in London in the dead of winter. Not only that, but based on his knowledge of the book, Pitt said he assumed the movie would be all about Louis, and realized too late it was far more centered on Cruise's Lestat character. Feeling like he'd been sidelined in a passive role and dealing with a nightmarish production, Pitt said he wanted out. He told Entertainment Weekly years later, "I'm telling you, one day it broke me. I called David Geffen, who was a good friend. He was a producer, and he'd just come to visit. I said, David, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. What will it cost me to get out?" And fortunately for Pitt, he said Geffen's figure was a stunning $40 million. Forced to complete the film, Pitt got through the production, which ultimately helped raise his profile as a co-star in a wildly popular box office smash. Ryan Reynolds' first time as Deadpool wasn't really something he wanted to do, at least not the way it was written on the page. First appearing in X-Men Origins Wolverine as a merc with a mouth, Reynolds had already been signed up to do a solo Deadpool movie. So when the character was slated to have a supporting role in Origins, the studio came to him with an offer to play it there first. He told Entertainment Weekly, "Origins came along and it was sort of like, play Deadpool in this movie or we'll get someone else to." With that kind of pressure, Reynolds may have feared that if he said no, it would jeopardize his deal for the Deadpool movie. Unfortunately, when he read the script, he wasn't happy about what he read. He felt pressured into accepting it though, telling the studio, "I'll do it, but it's the wrong version. Deadpool isn't correct in it." Ultimately, Reynolds was proved right. The film was a flop. The version of Deadpool in the film's climax was widely panned, and it would all but nix the notion of a Deadpool movie. It eventually took Reynolds himself leaking some CG test footage years later to finally get it off the ground. Though her life was cut tragically short during a boating trip in 1981, actor Natalie Wood managed to appear in a number of all-time classics, including Rebel Without a Cause and West Side Story, rising to fame as a teenager. When she was still in high school, she played a key supporting role in the iconic 1956 John Ford Western The Searchers, starring John Wayne. The role she played wasn't one that she was happy to take though. In those days, actors had a few options under what was called the studio system, where actors were contracted to a studio that put them into pictures on their whim. This system was typically lucrative for everyone involved, but it meant that actors couldn't pick their projects. In the late 1940s, Wood had signed a 7-year deal with Warner Brothers and found herself placed into Ford's film in a part she felt she wasn't right for.
"These are my people. Und mehr. Go. Go, Martin, please."
Feeling miscast, Wood played Debbie Edwards, a young white woman who had been kidnapped as a little girl and raised by Native Americans. Wayne plays Ethan Edwards, her uncle, who spends years looking for her. Though the movie became one of the most beloved in the Western genre, Wood's role as Debbie was often seen as a dark spot in an otherwise great film. While lamenting his part in Dogville, an experimental film by controversial writer-director Lars von Trier, Paul Bettany said he felt tricked into the movie and forced to complete it after he signed on. He spoke about his role in Dogville in a 2011 interview with The Guardian, saying he saw the movie as an unenjoyable experience and that he only did the film because of his co-star. Stellan Skarsgård fibbed to me. He said, "You're gonna turn up, it'll be fantastic, it's like a party all the time." But once on set, the production turned out to be a disaster from top to bottom, and Bettany confronted his friend. Bettany recalled the conversation, saying, "I said, Stellan, what were you talking about?" And he said, "Man, I was making it up. I just couldn't face doing it without you." According to Bettany, Von Trier was a bit of a puppet master, unwilling to collaborate with the actors. Still, he didn't want to be too negative about the filmmaker, admitting his moody nature may be why he is considered to be so extraordinary. In the early 2000s, superhero movies were booming, and Lionsgate turned to indie comic hit Hellboy. Guillermo del Toro wrote and directed the film, and cast Ron Perlman in the title role of the demon, who becomes a government agent. Doug Jones played his sidekick, the amphibious Abe Sapien. But when the movie was in post-production, Frasier actor David Hyde Pierce was brought in to replace the voice of Abe Sapien in an effort to give the movie a little more star power.
I need to touch it to see.
See what?
Past, future. Whatever this object holds.
In an interview with CBR in 2008, Jones said Pierce was apparently unaware that his voice work was being used to replace him, perhaps assuming that the man in the suit was a simple stunt person. David Hyde Pierce comes in. He hears my original performance in his earpiece. He sees my performance on the film footage that he has to voice over, and he steps back and says, "Why am I here?" to himself. Pierce was already under contract though and couldn't quit, so he did his job and left. And much to the annoyance of the film's producers, the Frasier star refused to be credited for his performance out of respect for Jones. In the end, it muted the very reason he was hired, as his name wasn't out in front of the movie. For the sequel, the studio learned its lesson, and Jones was simply allowed to perform Abe Sapien in full voice and all. Not every actor who is forced to play a role they hate regrets it. Such is the case with Robert Pattinson, whose part as Edward Cullen in the Twilight films made him an international superstar and allowed him to be able to pick more personal indie projects like High Life, Cosmopolis, and The Lighthouse that earned him critical acclaim. Nevertheless, playing the sparkly vampire Edward wasn't a good experience for him in the first Twilight, as the actor said he hated his character and felt he was at risk of being fired every day. And it was a role he was forced to continue playing for 3 more movies. Over the years, Pattinson has been candid about his dislike for the Twilight series, as well as his critique of its author, Stephenie Meyer, after reading the books. He told E! "Some things about Edward are so specific, I was just convinced, like, this woman is mad. She's completely mad and she's in love with her own fictional creation. And sometimes you would feel uncomfortable reading this thing."
If it hadn't have been so successful, I think people would have thought it was really weird. It's a really weird story.
He heaped plenty of hate on fans of the books and movies too, and in the DVD commentary, talked about leaving the premiere of the first movie midway through. He also downright hated his own character. The original Star Wars film from 1977 boasted a leading cast of mostly unknown actors like Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher, while its 2 lone big names were British veterans Peter Cushing and Alec Guinness in supporting roles. Though Cushing was known for making schlock horror movies for decades, Guinness was a well-respected Academy Award-winning actor, famous for movies like The Bridge on the River Kwai and Dr. Zhivago. He was a serious thespian who resented that his role as Obi-Wan Kenobi was what all audiences seemed to know him from after 1977, and he hated the role itself.
"These aren't the droids you're looking for."
"These aren't the droids we're looking for."
He can go about his business.
Calling the dialogue rubbish and his character unbearable, he famously told a friend via written correspondence that he didn't enjoy making the film at all. While his co-stars all said he was lovely on the set and a joy to work with, Guinness's experience making the first movie seemed to have been anything but pleasant for him. But despite the poor experience, the actor was back reprising the role for its 2 sequels, feeling somewhat forced to return because of the massive payday he knew he could demand given the franchise's sudden popularity. As a result, Guinness leveraged strict requests and was able to at least get a bigger salary, a shorter shooting schedule, reportedly just half a day of filming, as well as a percentage of the sequel's profits. For many moviegoers, Tyler Perry is Madea and nothing else. They don't know him for his roles in popular dramas like Gone Girl, Alex Cross, or Vice, but only for his part as a manic grandmother featured in more than a half-dozen movies. Beginning with 2005's Diary of a Mad Black Woman, the character has also appeared in holiday-themed flicks like Boo! A Madea Halloween, and even an animated adventure. Inspired by Eddie Murphy's gender-bending roles in The Nutty Professor, Perry told NPR that he also created the character to pay tribute to the older women in his family. But when it proved popular enough to spark its own franchise, Perry was forced to keep going against his will for decades more. While doing press for the film A Fall from Grace in 2020, Perry told Level, "It was never something I enjoyed doing. My hand to God. I hated the costume, the wig, all of it." The interviewer was skeptical that he could really have hated it that much, but Perry insisted it was true, even from the very beginning. "The problem seems to be that Madea became a hit," he explained. "It ended up being a $2 billion franchise. At that point, there wasn't really an option of saying no, and he kept putting the wig back on year after year." Though he claimed during that 2020 interview he was happy it was finally over, he returned in 2022 with A Madea Homecoming. When an actor feels forced to play a role or return to one they wanted to leave behind, it's not always for financial or contractual reasons. Sometimes it's simply a matter of conscience, a feeling of obligation, not just to the audience but to the character themselves. That's how things went down for Jamie Lee Curtis when she begrudgingly returned again as Laurie Strode for a brief cameo in Halloween Resurrection, a sequel to what she had hoped would be a final appearance in Halloween H2O 20 years later. In spite of her promise to herself that H2O would be her final role in the series, she agreed to return for one simple reason: she hated the plans for the sequel, feeling the retconned ending of H2O ruined her character, and wanted to at least try to do it right for the sake of the audience. In Resurrection, it's revealed that Strode hadn't killed Michael Myers in the previous film's ending, but murdered an innocent man wearing Myers' mask. Unwilling to leave the franchise on that note, she felt she owed it to fans to see her character out with a definitive death.
Well, Halloween Resurrection was a joke.
Though she agreed to do a small cameo, Curtis did have one demand. She told producers while attending New York Comic-Con in 2022, "You have to kill me in the first 10 minutes of the movie. I've killed an innocent man and I can't live with that." Jason Bourne wasn't a role that Matt Damon truly hated, and he has seemed to love playing the character in the Bourne identity and its many sequels. There is, however, one sole exception, the Bourne Ultimatum. Over the years, the actor has been extremely candid about what went wrong, placing blame on the studio for inking screenwriter Tony Gilroy to a bad deal, which resulted in a rushed rewrite. The end result was a screenplay Damon described as awful, telling GQ, "It's terrible, it's really embarrassing. He was having a go, basically, and he took his money and left."
I doubt that.
And why would you doubt that?
If you were in your office right now, we'd be having this conversation face to face.
Bad script in hand, the studio was forced to massively overhaul it with just weeks until filming was set to kick off. And Damon didn't want to do it. Ultimately, Damon was forced to make Ultimatum without a script he liked. He may not outright regret it though, because when it hit theaters, it received rave reviews and became the highest grossing entry in the franchise. Stanley Tucci is one actor who was forced to continue working on a movie he didn't want to make because he couldn't get out of his contract. Signed up to play the villain in a supernatural murder mystery, The Lovely Bones, Tucci admitted that he quickly came to hate his own character, serial killer, pedophile, and child rapist George Harvey, and found the experience of making the movie a difficult one. He told Entertainment Weekly, "It's a wonderful movie, but it was a tough experience simply because of the role. I tried to get out of playing the role, which is crazy because I needed a job."
I don't want you to leave.
I'm not gonna hurt you, Susie.
Of course, Tucci's attempts to back out of playing Harvey amounted to nothing, and the actor was forced to soldier on. His turmoil wasn't in vain though, because he was later rewarded for his performance with an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor.
I did think it was have fun with it because it's a very silly kind of souffle of a movie.
It's easy for an actor to look back on a bad movie after the fact and acknowledge that it was terrible, but it's another for a star to realize that their movie is going to be awful while they're in the middle of making it, or worse, before it even starts production. But that's just what happened to Alec Baldwin while he was working on the 2012 flop Rock of Ages, a jukebox musical comedy featuring the songs of 80s rock greats like Def Leppard, Guns N' Roses, Joan Jett, Twisted Sister, and Pat Benatar. He said in an interview with Vanity Fair, "A week in, you go, oh god, what have I done? The plane is buffeting, the engine is on fire." Baldwin said he initially signed up to be able to work with director Adam Shankman and appear with stars like Tom Cruise and Russell Brand. But he immediately had second thoughts and asked out of his contract. Reports at the time cited a possible medical condition for his attempt to leave the film. But the actor now seems to admit that the real reason was that he simply didn't want to make the movie, which he called a total disaster. Though he hoped the studio would let him out of his deal, that never happened, and Baldwin was forced to complete it. Rock of Ages received middling reviews and was a box office bomb. For Winona Ryder, the 1990s were some of her biggest years, and she starred in a number of classics like Edward Scissorhands, Reality Bites, How to Make an American Quilt, and Girl Interrupted. In the middle of those favorites, though, was the 1996 third Boys, a movie that was raked over the coals by reviewers. In fact, her performance was called out as a weak spot, with the Washington Post saying she was downright miscast as a femme fatale. But after comments from Ryder were published in Nigel Goodall's 1998 book Winona Ryder, the biography, it became clear that she knew Boys wasn't going to be very good, and actively tried to get out of making it. According to Ryder, the film went through a number of last-minute script changes that forced her to reconsider the movie. Unfortunately, there was really nothing she could do. Her contract was signed, and she had no control over script rewrites. Next time I get a script for a tiny movie, I'll have to have a serious contract drawn up saying nothing can be changed without my approval. David Cross, best known today for his role as Tobias Funke in Arrested Development, had to keep coming back to star in a series about computer-animated singing chipmunks. Based on the iconic cartoon of the same name, Alvin and the Chipmunks came to live action in 2007 and put Cross into the role of record company CEO Ian Hawke. And when it became a huge box office hit, Cross had to return for 2 more, even though he hated his role in the first movie and didn't have a good time making it. By the third, he said he was downright miserable. During the press tour for his show The Increasingly Poor Decisions of Todd Margaret, Cross said, "I was contractually obligated to do 3. This last film was literally, without question, the most unpleasant experience I've ever had in my professional life. It was just a really awful, unpleasant experience."
I honestly don't regret it. There's no shame in it. I did it because I hadn't worked for 6 months at that point.
During the era when Hollywood was dominated by the studio system, plenty of actors were forced to do movies they didn't want to make. Most of them kept their feelings to themselves, as professionalism seemed to demand, though some, like Natalie Wood, voiced their displeasure on occasion. Nobody was more outspoken about their feelings on the system, though, than Olivia De Havilland, who was rarely afraid to express herself on the subject. The star of classics like Gone with the Wind and They Died with Their Boots On, De Havilland was famously unhappy with the movies that Warner Brothers kept giving her. In 1942, she was cast in the film Princess O'Rourke, a movie about a European princess living incognito in the US. The outspoken actor wanted nothing to do with the project. After refusing to accept the leading role, Warner Brothers suspended her. She eventually relented, and the film was released a year later. After that, a 7-year deal with the studio ended, but Warner Brothers claimed that because of her time spent suspended, she still owed the studio more movies. In the end, De Havilland took Warner Brothers to court in one of the most landmark trials in the history of the industry. Following a lengthy and bitter trial, the actor was victorious, and together with a separate ruling on the studio ownership of theater chains, the decision helped abolish the studio system forever.
Call your men, and it's the last sound you make.
Pirate movies were once one of Hollywood's biggest genres, but they were long gone by the 1990s, so it probably seems like a head-scratcher when Cutthroat Island was announced. A new swashbuckling adventure set on the high seas. It at least had a couple of big names, with Michael Douglas and Geena Davis expected to star. All that changed, however, when a new script was handed in that nobody seemed to have liked, and Douglas abandoned ship, using a loophole in his contract regarding unexpected rewrites. The Wall Street star was replaced by Matthew Modine, who was no slouch, but certainly wasn't the big name that Michael Douglas was. Though Davis too tried to quit the film, she didn't have the same outcome that Douglas did. To make matters worse, Davis was married to the film's producer, Rennie Harlin, so she swallowed her pride and wrote out the production. In the end, the movie was a disaster in theaters, grossing just $10 million. With a budget of $98 million, Cutthroat Island is one of the most notorious flops in the history of Hollywood, and nearly ruined Davis's career.
It's my job!
You go take care of my little girl now. That's your job.
Even if it was the biggest movie of 1998, grossing $500 million, Armageddon was never a favorite of its star, Bruce Willis. In the film, he plays Harry Stamper, an expert driller enlisted to go into outer space to help destroy an asteroid on a collision course with Earth. Since the movie's release, Willis has rarely wanted to talk about it. And when he has, he's had nothing but bad things to say, especially in terms of his difficult relationship with the movie's director, Michael Bay. He once told Ain't It Cool News, "Few people will work with him now, and I know I will never work with him again. It was a great crew, but a screaming director does not make for a pleasant set experience. But look, we were all big boys, and we got through it." The funny thing is, though, Willis never wanted to work with Bay in the first place, because his role as Henry Stamper in the film wasn't one he had any choice in playing. Willis's participation was part of a legal settlement after another project fell apart. The story starts with Willis's involvement in the Disney picture Broadway Brawler. It was a troubled project that collapsed 20 days into production, when Willis refused to continue making it. The studio understandably considered taking him to court, and Walt Disney Studios head Joe Roth met with Willis, who agreed to star in 3 movies at a reduced rate. Armageddon was the only one of the 3, which also included The Sixth Sense and The Kid that Willis said he outright hated making.